Starting this stream with item locked doors. And what I mean by this is by setting up a redstone door that will unlock when a specific item is used or stored, either in a chest or in a just tossed into a hopper. And basically using this as a sort of safety precaution. You don't really need it as much in single player, I suppose, but if you're doing co-op, and this probably is more helpful in multiplayer servers where the other characters can't mine in specific areas, but they can interact. So in other words, you can lock specific areas out without using any console codes. It's just something fun to do. In this case, the first one I used a simple trick, and it's fairly easy. I hid a hopper behind the painting, and what I used to do that is this slab right here to trick the painting into thinking that this is a full block, since for the sake of paintings, a painting will consider a slab almost the same as a block in certain situations. And so because of this, in this case, if you were to toss a block into the candlestick, it'll go right through and land in the hopper. The only thing here is just to remember where the hole is, or where the basically where the hopper is, and to be careful if somebody sees you doing it. They'll pretty much figure it out fairly easy. And it's kind of hard to, if you just put one painting down, it can become blatantly obvious. This one has multiple paintings around it, but it's not too hard to guess that something might be up. However, they not only have to guess where it is, but they also have to guess the actual item. Let's see, for example, I'll toss a diamond in, and it does nothing, because that's not the item that's set up for the passcode. Same thing for seeds or redstone. And to do this, you have to use items that can be stacked, or stackable items. But if you toss in a sand item, and I'm very bad at aiming sometimes. There we go. I should have. There we go. It opens up. And you can collect the items that you toss in through here. The only thing here, you just need a way to get the item from point A to point B. I have two ways to get out. One, when you toss an item in here, an item from this dispenser is dropped, and it really doesn't matter what you put in this dropper. You could put in all dirt and it wouldn't matter. You just need something to drop. And originally I was thinking I might just take the item I toss in and put it up there, but there's no real need to actually do that. And to make it simpler, all I need is just to have an item drop here. And the reason why it drops here is if once you go into it, you need a way to quickly close the door. And if it's a case like this, then all you have to do is just grab this item, and the door closes behind you. So it's a fairly quick way to actually get in. Once the door opens here, and then close. Now I put some glass to show exactly how all this works, and I'll go through that shortly now. What happens is once you toss a item into the hopper that's behind these books, it filters into these hoppers. The first hopper that it stops at is this one right here, basically. What happens when it reaches this hopper is that since there's a hopper underneath it, it asks an if question. And the if question is simply, can the item in the hopper above it go downward to hopper? Then only a dirt block can actually be filtered into this hopper, and it'll filter into the first block on the far left. This 10 will turn into a 11, and that will trigger this filter, causing that one dirt item to actually drop down one more. And that the dirt item that drops down to this one right here. Now it may not point towards it, but that's because the hopper doesn't necessarily have to point towards whatever it's being filtered towards. There's a hopper underneath it, it can go down. And that is one of the preferred methods for it to go down. That's actually what it's looking for first. If this hopper had been empty, then the item that reached the hopper above it would go straight down to this hopper, rather than going to the right. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you're using multiple hoppers. Now the reason why this hopper is pointing towards this comparator is because I want basically the comparator to judge the amount of items inside this hopper. And once the number of items reaches 23, then I want this in the short pulse. Basically, I want it to turn on this repeater, and this repeater will turn this NOT gate right here off, allowing one item in this hopper to move forward to this hopper. It seems a bit complicated, but it's not. It's pretty easy, pretty simple. What's happening is one item goes through. If it can go down, it goes down, and if it's a dirt item, then it'll go down to this hopper, turning it to 23, which will light up this repeater, turning this off, allowing one item from above to fall down to here, to this hopper right here. And when that happens, that one item from above goes down to this hopper, one of these items will move on. So basically you're just transferring one item at a time, and you're making sure that only one item can actually move on down the hopper line. Now the first one right here, this first filter is dedicated to placeholder items. And what I mean by placeholder items is I use, in this case, dirt blocks. You can use grass blocks. And it might actually be easier to use blocks that you can't really, or you don't see very often. And grass blocks, the only way you can actually get that in the single player is to actually use either the silk item on a shovel, which will allow you to, when you break a grass block, instead of a dirt block item appearing, a grass block item will appear. So basically you can mine the grass directly up. Whereas if you were to use your fist or a regular shovel, when you break a grass block, it turns into a dirt block. But this is mostly this preference. And this could be 2. This could be 12. But this pattern seems to work well. 12, 3, 3, 3. This sand item is the item that I want filtered out. In this case, the sand item is the item that I'm using as a key. So in other words, to open this door up here, you need to have a sand block. And only a sand block will work. Any other block that you toss in, if it's a dirt block, it will be stopped by this filter. And if it's any other block, it'll just pass on. Once it reaches here, this is the sand block one. If it's a sand block, it'll go down. The dirt blocks have already been filtered out, so there shouldn't be a problem with having a dirt block mess up this filter. And the dirt block can easily mess up the filter, which is why you want to be careful in who has access to any of these hoppers. If someone were to toss a dirt block into this hopper right here, for example, what would happen is this 12 would turn into a 13 and a sand block would go down. And your filter would be completely messed up. Because every single item that you toss in would fall into this first one and pass on through. It wouldn't matter what the item was. And that's also another possibility if you wanted to set up one. Well, really, there are easier ways to do it, but you could set up to where it will accept any item. If the items aren't a dirt block or sand block being picked up by either of these two filters, what happens is it'll go from this hopper to this hopper, and it'll continue down the line, and it'll bypass everything. And this is just basically a catch-all. All of the items in question go here, so it'll pick up everything you throw into it, and it really doesn't matter what item you throw into it. As long as it's an item, it'll end up here. The thing you have to remember with this, though, is you want to actually empty it every now and then. But since there's so many hoppers, it's unlikely that it will fill up for a while. Now, once you toss in a sand block, and the sand block is what I want to use to unlock it, I need a way to tell it I've gotten the sand block. Specifically to tell this dropper, I've found the sand block, unlock the door now. And how I do that is I borrow a little bit of the power that this redstone torch is putting out. And to do this state, no power is going into it. Now what happens when the sand block actually goes in is when this redstone torch is turned off, this is also turned off, turning this on. So I'll show it to you. Basically sending a pulse, a very short pulse, to this dropper, telling it drop one item. That item falls upon these pressure plates, and I have two right here because the hopper is these droppers and dispensers aren't exact, so every once in a while one of the items will land on this block. So this having two pressure plates right here assists to ensure whatever item drops from here lands on a block to open the door. Now I have these doors set on a always on state, and I just do that just by simply using a NOT gate, an inverter, to ensure that the doors are always closed. In this case, well, the pistons are always fired, which ensures that this door is closed. In a if you were to build it in vanilla, you'd probably be using stone instead of glass. That's just simply so I can display the actual building a whole lot easier. And there are other ways that you can hide it too, and I have a couple more ways you can do it in this building over. Straightforward. Now, how the pressure plates work is the pressure plates, whichever one is actually hit, be it the first one or the second one, powers the redstone underneath it. Now, the reason why it doesn't continue to power this piston right here is because this repeater right here it only accepts an input from one direction, and that's from behind it, and it sends the input forwards. So in other words, if you have a redstone line to the left or to the right of it, then it doesn't take that as an input. That is, however, an issue if you were to use a comparator, since the comparator uses input A and input B, and that alters exactly how it works out. And input A or input B can go from both sides, or either side. This one right here only has one input, so that will help you when you're actually putting together how your patterns work out. Now these pressure plates power up this line right here, sending the signal to this NOT gate, which turns off the pistons, allowing whatever block you have right here to be retracted, opening the door. And I'll just take this off, and now they're back on. Now I have a second way that you can actually open this. You could step right here, for example, and run by, but it's a fairly quick. The door is fairly quick, so I have a second option, and that is this button. Normally a button wouldn't be this long, and if it were just the button itself, it would be just as quick as these pressure plates. But what I have right here is a time delay. And the reason why it's set up this way is because I want the signal to reach this NOT gate fairly quickly, and then remain on long enough for this signal to catch up to it. So you can see what is happening here. This signal stays on long enough for this delayed signal to reach it. And the delayed signal delays it further by keeping it on just a little bit longer. The signal is also delayed by the fact that I'm using a redstone repeater to step down the signal. And 4 redstone repeaters right here, all set on the 4th delay, is just enough. If there were a 5th one, and you were to move the 5th repeater past the first setting, the first setting is right here. It's the very first setting when it appears. That's the first setting, second setting, third setting, fourth setting. Fourth setting being the one that has the longest delay. But the 5th one on the second setting will actually cause the door to close, and then it'll just open up again. So this is just setting it up just enough redstone repeaters, and then testing it to make sure that the door is open long enough, and this is long enough for you to easily get through if you're not delaying. Now I have a similar setup over here, but with mostly the bricks set in to show exactly how it might look. And this is also set in to where you might actually put in a hallway. You could even put the hallway in this way if you wanted to. But you might have an indent in here somewhere. Just basically what you're looking for is just some way to hide it. And this isn't really hidden, it's mostly as a display piece. What happens here is that the hopper is hidden right here, and this, where you hide the hopper, you can hide it anywhere. It doesn't even have to be in this room. You just have to have it in a place where you can actually drop the item and then go to it. But this is simply here for simplicity's sake. You see I'm tossing in sand, nothing. Redstone, seed, dirt, all nothing. I toss in a diamond, door opens. And the setup here is similar, but instead of having the chest over there, it's just over here. And how you set up where you pick up the items and how you set up the inside can vary depending upon how you're building it and how much resources you have. Some of the builds are more resource intensive than others. This one, for example, doesn't use a stepper. Doesn't use any redstone repeaters to step down the signal to delay the door. Since the button is fairly close, you could hit it and then easily go through. So instead of actually making it complex, this is a pretty simple door. The one thing to remember with this type of setup, however, is that it can be very easy to overwhelm the hoppers. And it can be easy to overwhelm it with the item that you use as a placeholder. And the reason is because of the nature of hoppers. Hoppers aren't really a full block, although they behave like a block at times. They are a semi-solid block. So in other words, it's easy for a block to actually fall through the side of this thing and fall into the hopper right next to it. Now this is an interesting one in which basically here, instead of just one item, I have 3 items set up. And this is a little bit more complex setup as well. In other words, if you were to set it up like this, it looks sort of like an inset. So mainly this is just a way to hide it. You don't want to put the redstone, any torches on anything that moves, because if the torch is on a block, for example, like this right here, it will break when the block moves. And the same thing can be said for carpets. So I'll put a redstone torch right there. With this one, there are 2 chests here, and that's mostly for convenience. If you just want to throw an item into the chest, it doesn't really matter what it is, and have it be of no consequence, you can just toss it right in here. And that basically just sends it right into the item filter range, or the filter program that I've set up. The one of consequence is right here, and with this one, all you have to do is, and I'll put one glass thing right back here, so you can actually see the items when they fall. If you toss in and I'll use these items right here to slow it down just a little bit. But if you toss in a diamond, a seed, and a redstone, then you can see each of the specific locked items corresponds with one of these. To close this, all you simply have to do is just walk into the first one, and it'll close right behind you. And say with this one, it's also different that any one of them triggered is not enough. You have to trigger all 3 of them. So that makes it just a little bit more secure. You have to know which of the 3 items. And with this one, there's many ways you can set it up as well. You don't have to set them all up on the same filter line. You can actually place the place where you toss in the item elsewhere, to where you have to toss in one item, say anywhere out here, and then 2 of them in here. So in other words, if someone thinks that this is the way they get in and they think they know all 3 items, they don't know that you can only input 2 of the items here and 1 of the items elsewhere. Or you can just simply put 1 item input here and 2 items elsewhere. It just depends on what type of security setting you want to set up. And that just makes this a bit more complicated. This too has a delayed button. Although it's set a little bit further, and mostly because of the amount of programming necessary to set this build up. And then I'll show you the line of how it's set up right here. It's similar to the one with 1 item, to where this filter right here filters out the placement holder blocks, and then each one is looking for 1 specific item. If it doesn't see it, it basically tells this hopper above it, pass the item on. So dirt blocks stop here, redstone blocks stop here, diamond blocks stop here, and seed blocks stop here. And all I'm doing right now is just fixing this right here to tell it to pass along the item and where to pass it on. So I'll just toss in the 8 blocks here, and you can see for a brief second the item's passing along. The item's going down here, and then from there it will go down here, and it'll continue along the line of hoppers, leading it to this chest. Now when you're using 3 items, you really want to use 3 different triggering mechanisms. Now you only really have to put one of the trigger mechanisms here if you really wanted to. And that's because since you need all 3 of them to actually open this door, when you walk in, you only need to grab one of them. So for simplicity's sake, you just need to put 1 item up here. I just put all 3 up here just to simply show exactly how it works. And to show that all 3 of these contribute to opening the door. And it's also one of the reasons why this button is also inset further backwards back here, but it's not a problem for this one. And now I'll show you how exactly these 3 work. And I'll take one of them off to show how it doesn't work. Each of these 3 pressure plates has their own line. Basically a redstone line to send power to. And what I've set up here is an AND gate of sorts. Functions as an AND gate. What I'm trying to do is to say not this, and not this. Or really saying this, and this, and then inverting it afterwards. If that makes any sense. Since I want it on all the time. So I have this inverter right here to turn on once all 3 items are loaded, and turn off this inverter. to retract these pistons. So basically on, and on turns this off. NAND gate. And you really can add as many inputs as you want. The only thing is it can affect exactly how complex the code is, and if you're using a different item for each one of these inputs. The thing is, interesting enough, you don't have to use the same item for each of these inputs. You do have to use it in this setup because all the items are being filtered through one filter system. If each of these inputs had different filter systems, then you could in theory use send for all. You could have a 6 item input for the door, 6 item code for the door, and they can all be sand, or they could be sand and dirt in various combinations depending upon how you set it up, and also where you set it up. So really the complexity is almost unlimited. But you just have to keep in mind that unless you're using one filter system, then you're going to have to place each of the inputs in various other locations. So that might also, the complexity is good in that it makes it harder to crack the code, but it also takes time to actually go through a code. Not just designing the code, but actually putting the items into their location to actually use it. If you had 2 items out here, you'd have to do those first and get to this one before the item decays. And the decay rate isn't so bad, but on another server it might actually be faster than what you're expecting, and the decay rate will determine exactly how you set everything up. And you don't have to set everything up for a hallway or even a room inside of a house. You can set everything up to look about as natural as you can get it to. And this right here is a bit overgrown, but if you do this around the entire area, you can fairly well disguise it. What you're looking here is to just break up the pattern so that there's so much for a person to look at. They don't automatically notice the door in question or the input place in question. That could be, for example, right here. Although this does make it a little bit difficult to actually get it into it. But there's a hopper underneath that. Well, on the back. In this case, you might want to just do that. Although that makes it a little bit more obvious. Really, it just depends on how you want to set everything up. And this is simply just a case of just trying to make everything so busy that they don't see the obvious. Or they just look at it and just bypass it. Although if they're seriously looking for it, they'll find it. But there are many different ways you can do it. You can hide it underneath water as well. In this case, The door itself is simply hidden right here. You don't have to have it close here either. You can place the switch or however you're going to have the secret door open elsewhere. And this is just a simple matter of figuring out exactly where you're going to put it. And how wide of it. This is right here is just to show. It has an impact of where you can set up pistons with a 2. I normally use a 2 block one, and that's simply because being 2 blocks, it's easy to get into, easy to get out of, easy to go through the portal. So this is simply for just simplicity's sakes, but you can easily just have one if you wanted to. The only thing is, depending upon how you do it, it can be pretty obvious. But if you were to set up something like, say, this right here, you can see where the pattern you can see where a pattern can help hide exactly what is there. Because that means that this one thing right here won't stand out as much. So this is how it would look when it's not open. And now it's open. It's easy to get through, it's simply depends upon what you're looking to make. With 3 it becomes more complicated because the one's in the center, and that's really the problem. On the outer edge you can put a piston underneath it or above it, and those work fairly well. So in other words, you could have it open from above and all below, or you can split it to where these 2 from the center open from above and below, and these 2 open from either side. But this is mostly a factor of figuring out exactly what space you have to place your programming down. And that is simply it. And this is the testing thing I was doing earlier, to where 3 on inputs will turn off, and this right here is just a NAND. It's a 3 input NAND gate. If one of these is off, or say for example one item is not in, then this was powered. In the case up here, one of these inputs being off means the item hasn't been loaded. or the item in question that you've item locked the door with hasn't been loaded. So the output's on, keeping the piston fired, keeping the door closed. And once the item is finally in, then the end gate assures that this is off. And thus the door opens. And that is it for my secret item block doors. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll add it to YouTube today. Thank you very much for watching.